Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and as we do on the last Monday of every month at the 11 o'clock a.m. Central Time hour, we welcome Cheryl Chumley to the program for the Cheryl Chumley Hour. Cheryl, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Good to see you again. We've been doing this for quite some time with the author of The Devil in D.C. and Police State USA. She's also the online opinion editor for the Washington Times and a newly appointed Fox News contributor. And we're delighted to see you getting the press that you deserve, that we have enjoyed a great relationship with you here and glad to share you with the Fox News community.
Well, God's great for allowing me this platform, so hopefully I will not disappoint.
Well, you certainly don't, and adding a credible conservative voice, one who's seen this, truly the tearing down of statues in America is that exactly what you wrote about, this Orwellian America that George Orwell's 1984 so clearly identified that this was one of the symptoms of what was coming.
That's exactly true. And, for those people across America who look at this whole monument chaos that's been going on for over a week now as simply dealing with monuments, it's not. There's a deeper root to it. And what it is the left has taken Charlottesville, Virginia, the protests that started there over white nationalists who were protesting the removal of a Robert E. Lee monument. And these white nationalists, of course, have a First Amendment right, and they had a permit to protest this. And then in come the Antifa thug protesters, the counter protesters, who had absolutely no permit and were there armed with clubs and such simply to start mayhem and violence. For people who are looking at this issue as just simply over statues and monuments, it's a little bit misplaced. This is the left's most recent wedge to tear down the Donald Trump administration, and even beyond that, to turn this country 180 degrees over and flip it from a constitutional republic to a progressive / socialist / anarchist dream. And this is how they're doing it most recently. They're doing it by going after our nation's symbols, our nation's history.
When we look across the world, this is something that's happened in other countries. It's happened in the former Soviet Union. It's happened in South America under these regimes. It's happened really everywhere, but it hasn't happened here because of our freedoms, because we have the freedom to look at our young history, 240-year history, and understand where we came from and what it took to get here. But now this is going to be an effort to finally sanitize history to only give one view. And that one point of view is going to be this socialist, Marxist influence that has already saturated Common Core. Our kids are no longer taught about the Holocaust. Civil rights has become a byword. What we considered to be the founding fathers, now they're suing to take out "In God We Trust" off our currency, to rewrite this model. Steeples being taken off of churches, Catholic parochial schools removing Joseph and Mary from a Catholic school to try to appease the community. This is folly. This is absurdity. And how do we get to the point where we finally are continuing to succumb to what movement got prayer taken out of school, that got abortion legalized, that got marriage redefined, and ultimately will create an environment where you can marry yourself, you can have children as brides. The age of marriage, Muhammad was 6 when he was betrothed, 9 when he consummated the marriage, and this is going to become the model here. And we're just headed down this path, Cheryl, of destruction. Where is the moral outcry? Where's the Republican Party?
That's a really good question. Where is the Republican Party on this? If you look at what's been going on with the monuments and the teardown, the Republican Party has been only too happy to jump right in with the Democratic Party and criticize Trump for his initial response to Charlottesville, which if you actually go back and read the transcript of what he said, or if you watch a video of his initial remarks, there's nothing wrong with what he said. He condemned violence on all sides, and he also made the remark that there were good people on both sides. And his reference was to the fact that it wasn't simply white nationalists who have been protesting or who were protesting that day the removal of the Robert E. Lee Monument. There are a lot of First Amendment advocates. There were a lot of veterans there protecting the white nationalists' right to protest. And there were simple observers who just don't like our history being whitewashed this way. The Charlottesville issue has been going on for months. It was a campaign issue during the campaign for governor in the state of Virginia, something that I've covered myself. And I've written about the Charlottesville Robert E. Lee statue before. So this issue is not something that sprung up overnight. And part of the problem is, which you referred to a little bit, the schools nowadays, our public school system is basically whitewashing our great history, our founding father history, and replacing it with the ideas that our founding fathers were old racist white men. And that leads to the logic that the Declaration of Independence, the founding documents the founders penned, must inherently be racist. So you have this generation coming up who believes that our country is founded on racism, and then that therefore justifies their violence in the street to protest against the racism.
We spoke up in this election cycle to put Donald Trump in office. We overwhelmingly, as the conservative voice in America, made a statement, but we've never backed up the statement. You've got Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, who is now siding with John McCain and Jeff Flake and Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer. This is a betrayal of biblical proportion. And the latest reports coming out of Washington is that John McCain is probably the biggest White House leaker. And if they decide to prosecute that, that is a treasonous offense. And the rhetoric surrounding him being a songbird in Vietnam as a prisoner of war now comes full circle as this individual who has just completely turned with a vendetta against the president. He's now pulling GOP leadership in with him. And this is, timing-wise and impact-wise, we're at a critical point, especially with what's going on in Houston, what's going on in Louisiana, this natural disaster, which the White House is responding to in much better form than the Bush administration or the Obama administration ever responded. And there's just nothing they can seem to do that's right, but they're building enemies all along the way, and the party is imploding, if you will.
The Republican Party, I believe, has been imploding for some time, but with Trump in the White House, it's forcing those who would otherwise stay quiet to take a very public stand. And not to keep going back to Charlottesville, but this is a huge event in history that divides the nation right now. What happened with Charlottesville is you saw Republicans who maybe would have stood silent in their opposition to Trump coming out and taking vicious anti-Trump stances in the news. And they did this simply because they were scared of their constituents who only go by the mainstream media, and the mainstream media has painted Trump as racist and misogynist and so forth. So they felt the need to call out to their constituents that, hey, we're not like Trump, we're not with him. And so now you have just, it seems to me the entire Republican Party has risen up against Donald Trump. And you have the Democratic Party against him, you have the mainstream media against him, you have his own Republican Party against him, and now you have some of his closest advisors, the ones that you thought were his allies and friends, they're being ousted on a near daily, weekly basis from the White House. So this certainly is a catastrophe for conservatives in America who are looking to Trump to bring some sanity and reason and good old common sense back to the government.
You know, the response that's out there in regards to Charlottesville is stunning. The executives that pulled off of the Business Council, now you have 8 members of the White House National Infrastructure Advisory Council have resigned over his reported response. I don't think that anybody is looking at his response. It is the reporting on his response. You know, this idea of naming names, there's an old rule, you never name names because you're going to leave somebody out. So, you know, condemning all racism as evil is the perfect statement. The individual attack or the naming of individual groups really hold White House public relations, White House spokespeople, White House advisors for not crafting a message that was inclusive. You know, we continue to shoot the messenger. Who wrote this statement? Did he write this statement himself in a vacuum? He didn't run it past any advisors. Is John Kelly really not involved as the chief of staff? Is this just completely going on where the president is operating as an island with nobody looking at anything he's going to say? I find that to be completely impossible and improbable. So this fallout attacking them, it's truly a messenger. Certainly there's his editorial overrides that he has the ability to put in whatever he wants, but he certainly would not strike the name of a group if it was in there. If his advisors put it in there in the presentation, give me a message that I need to bring about this Charlottesville situation. Let me see something on my desk in the next 20 minutes. I can see that happening. I did that as a corporate executive. Let me have something on my desk. I've got to respond to this situation. I need an appraisal of it in 20 minutes. It happened. But the idea that every word is crafted by him and him alone in a vacuum is absurd. So the clear agenda of attacking him becomes apparent.
Well, his initial statement that he gave hours after the Charlottesville protests, first off, I don't see anything wrong with it. And second off, I think that was all Trump. That was crafted by Trump, and here's why. I think he purposely left out naming groups because for 8 years under Barack Obama, we saw Obama respond to matters of things that were sold in the press as police brutality. We saw Obama come out and name the police, name basically anybody who stood against Black Lives Matters as the enemy, when he conveniently forgot to mention the violence on the side of such groups as Hands Up, Don't Shoot, and Black Lives Matter. So the message under Barack Obama coming from the White House was that police were racist, police were guilty of brutal acts against minorities, police were purposely targeting minorities. And I think America was frustrated and fed up with that. And Trump came out in the wake of Charlottesville, and he made a purposeful intent to not blame simply one side. First off, without having all the information, which was a smart move because we learned later that it was the counter-protesters who were equally complicit in starting the violence. They were equally guilty of starting violence. And second off, I think he was doing a hat tip to those Americans who were sick and tired of the 8 years of Barack Obama blasting the law and order side and yet giving complete free rein and a complete pass to the violent minority protesting side, like Black Lives Matter. So I believe that initial statement was all Trump. I think the next day when he came out and he specified the neo-Nazis and white nationalists, I believe that that some of his advisors had a little bit of a political hand in that.
You know, Sebastian Gorka's statement that he was forced out because of Hillary Clinton sympathizers and this Democratic agenda to derail the Trump administration ties perfectly into this Charlottesville agenda that says there's people who are undermining the White House, undermining the Oval Office. Can Sebastian Gorka, can Steve Bannon have impact outside? Because I actually thought that I would see different reporting out of Breitbart since Steve Bannon rejoined, but I don't see a different reporting out of Breitbart.
We're kind of at a weird moment in time. You're right. Breitbart hasn't taken a huge switch to the direction that you would think would happen when Steve Bannon rejoined the staff there. But I do believe that both Steve Bannon and Sebastian Gorka will be loads more influential outside the White House, which has been pretty much taken over by globalist type people, and add that to the holdovers from Barack Obama's administration, and what you have is a pure silencing of the voices that would have been represented by both Bannon and Gorka. So I think Steve Bannon, not only with his news site, but now with his inside knowledge and contacts in the White House, and Sebastian Gorka with his still very large platform on not just the national but international scene. He's one of the foremost speakers of radical Islamism. I think both of those people can have huge impact going forward.
The timing of so many of these events seems odd. The Joe Arpaio announcement of the pardon prior to a sentencing, and in the midst of a Friday afternoon news dump and all of the attention on this natural disaster in Houston, Corpus Christi, Galveston, the whole eastern region of Texas and Louisiana. What's the logic behind dropping something in there controversial when he was getting a tremendous amount of press from the governor of Texas, Abbott, who sung his praises, saying that the president immediately declared a natural disaster. The president immediately began to make federal resources available, the ability to now draw on FEMA resources and get grants and aid in there, and low-cost loans or no-cost loans for people to begin thinking about the future and the rebuilding after this event. Every person that got on, from mayors of cities to governors to civil defense people, all sung the praises of the White House, saying this is by far faster response than we got in Katrina, faster response than we got in any other event of the kind. Why then the strategy to, in all this praise, to not allow a time to bask in the moment of great coverage and leaders in the community singing the praises of the White House?
Well, I think the reason the Bannon dump, to put it bluntly, came on a Friday late afternoon amid what you described, for two reasons. First off, I think the Trump base actually likes Steve Bannon quite a bit. Mm-hmm. They credit him with being the populist voice that helped drive Trump into office, and kind of the Trump whisperer who would keep Trump in line with maintaining, upholding the promises that he made to the average American on the campaign trail. So I think to avoid anger from the base, or at the very, very least outrage from the base. But there's another reason too, I believe. I think that Democrats who have been doing nothing but calling for Steve Bannon, Sebastian Gorka's, and also Stephen Miller's heads on a plate for weeks now, I think putting that out first and forefront in the news cycle gives Democrats a chance to claim a win. Whether it's their win or not, whether it's the Democratic pressure that brought down Bannon and Gorka, Whether that's true or not, or if it was just the fact that Trump on his own brought in too many globalists, and because of that, Bannon and Gorka decided on their own that they could not work within those boundaries. Whatever the reason is, the Democrats would claim it as a win, which, if you notice, they have. The DCCC has been out there tweeting 2 down, 1 to go in reference to the quote-unquote white nationalists of Bannon and Gorka, and in reference to their hopes to bring down Miller. Similarly, other Democrats have been doing the same. So that may have been a strategy. Usually late night Friday, big news coming from the executive is all strategized. It's not just a coincidence.
Well, this has been the oddest period of time that I can remember in my life from a political standpoint, with Washington under fire, with the president under fire, the scrutiny of every word spoken, of every announcement. There's never been such irreverence and such disrespect for the office of the president. And it has to be having an impact around the world in how America is viewed on the global scene. So this Afghanistan announcement, I heard from a commander in the Navy of possible deployment of new ships to the Iraq region coming up in the fall, that there may be additional resources placed there just because of tensions with Iran. It's a strategic location to reach Iran as a buffer in between Israel and Iran. We're seeing things come out of the Middle East, but the timing of this storm is quite biblical. If we take a look at a history of the last 100 years of major natural disasters that have occurred in the United States costing over $10 billion, we see that every one of them seems to be timed precisely with us sending peace talks to Israel. And this one was no different. And this one followed an eclipse that people speculated was judgment on America. Then we send Jared Kushner over to Israel to begin and renew peace talks, meetings with Muhammad Abbas, people talking about a potential 2-state solution. And all of a sudden, bam, America is hit with a natural disaster of biblical proportions. They say that this rainfall of projected to 50 inches is a once in history occurrence. And so we continue to meddle in Middle Eastern politics without having a cohesive strategy for peace to the region. Are we biblically bringing ourselves into a time of not learning from history?
Well, I am certainly no prophet or biblical scholar, but I do read the Bible, and I do believe what the Bible says. And I do know that if you believe that God numbers the hairs on your head, or that a sparrow does not fall to earth without God knowing, then certainly the countries, the matters of government from different countries is something that God would involve himself in as well. And so I think that you cannot discount what goes on the international stage with how our politicians in America act and react. And I do see that our entire world is a battle of principalities more than a battle of Republicans versus Democrats or one government versus another. So on that count, I would defer to prophecy experts and say that it would be stupid to shut your eyes and discount what they say. But at the same time, I don't have the expertise to agree or disagree with that. I just believe that what happens, on the world stage is governed by God's hands as well.
Amen.
And as far as what we're doing in overseas meddling, as a former military member, I can tell you that if I'm in the military and my leaders don't have a clear goal set for me, I don't like it. I don't want to go overseas and engage in some type of warlike mission without knowing what the end game is. Now that I'm not a veteran, it still makes common sense that if you are sending your military to an overseas location, you need to have clearly defined strategies, and that includes the end game. Because how do you know when you've won or lost unless you have the mission well defined? And I was a little bit disturbed by Donald Trump's flip-flop, because that is what it was, his flip-flop on Afghanistan policy. And I'm a little bit concerned that some of the people that have aligned themselves around Trump in the White House are now pushing him toward more a Barack Obama type of foreign policy than what we all envision would be a Trump policy.
Well, it certainly gives us pause to think about, are we looking at another Vietnam where we have an economic interest, or do we have trying to stem the flow of terrorism? You know, if those are the goals and those are the agendas to take out Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and cripple backers of ISIS, great strategy. But if it's just to be in a training and advisory role to assist the right side of this equation in Afghanistan, it's difficult to understand what the real end game is. Do we need to have presence in the region? We certainly do, because of the ongoing threats. But we need to be clear about what it is that we're trying to accomplish and set tangible goals, measurable goals, quantifiable goals that determine what success is of the mission. I agree with that. We're talking with Cheryl Chumley, online opinion editor for the Washington Times, Fox News, contributor, author of Police State USA, as well as The Devil in D.C., both from WND Books. We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the Senate coming back into session, Congress coming back into session, the debt ceiling, Obamacare, taxes, infrastructure, and especially in light of what's going on in Texas right now. We're seeing crumbling highways, bridges, overpasses, huge issues looking at the impact of Harvey and what it's saying about America's aging infrastructure. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our one-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're welcoming you back to the Cheryl Chumley Hour. We have this hour the last Monday of every month at the 11 o'clock Central Time hour. And welcome Cheryl Chumley, online opinion editor for the Washington Times and author of Police State USA and The Devil in D.C. Cheryl, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
So Congress is coming back after the holiday, Senate back in session to tackle the debt ceiling, Obamacare, taxes, and infrastructure. So they've got to vote to increase the debt ceiling to keep government operating. Donald Trump made the statement that he was willing to shut down the government. How does that sit? Was that just an idle threat? Was that just one of those bravado statements? Or what would happen, especially in light of our current national disaster in Texas and Louisiana? What would happen if we shut down the government?
Well, shutting down the government doesn't shut down the crucial core government functions. For instance, it's not that you shut down the government and all the military gets yanked. It's not that you shut down government and all the basic functions that government does comes to a halt. I don't think a government shutdown would impact FEMA's ability to roll out the assistance to those in Texas. And, you could always qualify a government shutdown anyhow, any way you wanted. You could qualify the government shutdown to be, we will shut this agency but not that. I think part of the thing is it's such a dramatic sounding statement. We're going to shut down the government. And it's been made over the last few years several times, and it produces this panic among those on the left that see government as the solution to everything. But for really the patriotic constitutional Americans, a lot of us just shrug our shoulders and say, good, maybe we'll save some money then, because it doesn't stop the core functions of government from happening. What it does is it makes the government get a little bit slimmer and tighter, which honestly they're supposed to be doing anyhow. So if you want to shut down the government, for a lot of Americans, the response is go ahead.
I think it would cover the national parks, the national museums, the national zoos. Those kind of efforts would not be funded, but basic services are continuing to be funded. You're right. Here's a president that's cut the debt by $100 billion in his first 7 months in office, an accomplishment that no other president has ever accomplished, and this doesn't make the news cycle because people are attacking his remarks, not his accomplishments. Corporate America is bailing on the president. This council that's been disbanded seems foolish in the long term. It seems foolish that the people on the Infrastructure Council would make an issue. Is there that much pressure? You know, when we look at who the left represents, it's much more vocal, it's much more mobilizing, and it's much better funded. But yet the Democratic Party is no longer the representation of the left because the Democratic Party is at 50% lower funding than it's ever been in the past. They're in deep trouble as far as raising money is concerned to be able to support these midterm elections coming up in 2018. And the bravado is they're going to take back Congress, they're going to take back the Senate, but they have no money to do it. It's the first time, I think, in my remembrance that the Republicans are raising more money at a 2-to-1 ratio than the Democratic Party. So these senators that are on the bubble in this next session of Congress have their work cut out for them. They've got to pass tax reform this year. They've got to pass infrastructure reform this year. They have to raise the debt ceiling this year in order to keep things moving. If they don't, what happens, Cheryl?
It depends on how it's sold in the press, and I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek because we already know how it's going to be sold in the press. It's going to hit as hard as possible at Republicans and at the White House because we have a campaign season coming and the media wants Democrats to take over some seats in Congress. But here's the thing. I think as far as infrastructure reform goes, I think Trump laid out a very good plan, or he tried to, before his press conference was overrun by the media who wanted to speak more about Charlottesville. But he laid out a really good idea for infrastructure reform where he held up a grid that was probably 6 to 8 feet in length to show the permitting process that you have to go through now in order to get, say, a building built or a road paved. And then he held up his idea of what he would do to make the permitting process shorter, and it was at least a third shorter on the pages that he held. And that's the key. If he can keep to that focus, whatever Congress does, he, on the federal level, through his executive orders, could do a lot with federal contracting processes, and that would trickle down to the private workforce doing business in the states and local government. So I think Donald Trump has a great idea with reducing the permitting process, which would naturally bolster infrastructure in this country. As far as tax reform goes, I think that's a longer issue anyhow. I think most conservatives, they want tax reform now, but they also realize that that's something that's going to take a year or two. Trump didn't campaign on overnight tax reform. He didn't promise to have that done as quickly as he would have Obamacare repeal. So I think he still has some political capital with making that work. And I think really no matter what he does and what the Republicans in Congress do, that the media is going to sell it as a failure anyhow. So the smart American, smart political watcher needs to know that.
So is there anything that's going to turn media around in any way to give fair coverage to this presidency? Is there a scandal? Is there a prosecuting of Hillary Clinton and the Benghazi, or the email, or Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Democratic National Committee on this corruption with secrets, national secrets being shared with Pakistanis who had an agenda to profiteer off of selling secret information. Is there anything that Jeff Sessions is going to be able to do in the AG role and able to turn this around to say that we're dealing with the swamp, we're draining the swamp, we found what's at the bottom of the swamp, and we're going to prosecute, and we're going to convene our own grand jury? Because this grand jury for the Russia investigation, that thing is so fizzled out of the media cycle. There's just nothing to it anymore. They haven't found anything, or they would be all over the front page of every paper in America and across the world if they found anything, and they've had ample time to find stuff. So is there anything that can happen in Washington to turn this around to a positive spin for the president?
Well, it's hard because most of the mainstream media is against Trump, as you know. And the logical way of looking at that whole Debbie Wasserman Schultz scandal, if she had been a Republican, the press would be howling right now.
Yes.
I mean, this woman would not be able to leave her house without 1,000 cameras following her every move. But because it's a Democratic operative, and because it touches on things like the Democrats' defense, irrational at times, of all things Muslim, because these are Pakistani-born Muslims that we're talking about on Capitol Hill. And because the Democrats have the media in their pockets, this whole Debbie Wasserman Schultz fiasco is just falling under the radar. So if Congress were to step up, remember the Republicans are in charge of committees that are supposed to watchdog for the American people on behalf of the American people. If they were to start taking their job a little bit more seriously and making a louder, larger case out of this whole Debbie Wasserman Schultz scandal, then perhaps it would take some of the heat off Trump as he tries to push forward his promised agenda through Congress. But for some reason, Republicans are a little bit hesitant to take on this scandal, which is a little bit baffling to me at this point.
Who is a Republican anymore? What is the GOP? Who do they see themselves? And are they a horse with no head? Paul Ryan, his approval rating in Wisconsin is an all-time low. You have Paul Nealon, who's raising up to be a voice of conservatism in Wisconsin, who is he's everywhere all the time, very, very vocal. Single-handedly feels like he brought TPP to a head and caused Paul Ryan to take a different position than what he had taken. When was the last time we had an incumbent Speaker of the House not get reelected?
Wasn't Eric Cantor outed by that surprise Tea Party, Tea Party freshman? But look where it gets us, though. Here we are facing the exact same questions, which is why, and we've been over this before, I always believe it doesn't matter whether it's Republicans or Democrats so much in Congress or the White House. People in America have to watchdog and have to be vocal and take it on themselves to press their government officials to do the right thing. Because if you elect somebody and you think, oh, my candidate won, now I can sit back and I don't have to worry about anything anymore, we're just going to keep coming round and round to this same circle, to this same stopping point, and our politicians that we elect are going to go up to Capitol Hill and forget about us. So it's incumbent on the average American to stay involved in politics, not just get involved on voting day.
You know, you make such a good point that the only thing that motivates a politician is re-election. That's it. Campaign financing and re-election. Job security, getting the vote. And the idea of term limits kind of takes some of that out of the equation, but doesn't eliminate it, because then they go back into the some way back in the public sector and resurface either in gubernatorial races or state senate races, or move from the Senate to Congress and from the Congress to Senate, and there's all kinds of loopholes in that kind of system, and career politicians become career politicians. And we have the wealthiest career politicians in the world where you go to Congress as an unknown and you come out as a multimillionaire. How does that happen? This is the most corrupt system of entitlement and profiteering, but yet we feel like we have the best system, and we do by comparison to other countries. But corruption is the concern that the Founding Fathers had in becoming a federally heavy country. But it seems like anybody that brings an agenda of change is going to be shot down, and the change that they try to implement will be unsuccessful. You know, are we seeing that evidenced in this microscope that Donald Trump is under?
I think so. And really, change is such a funny goal to have. To me, the change that we should be worried about in politics is not a change from a less conservative person to a more conservative, or a change from a Democrat to a Republican, but a change from a corrupt, unprincipled politician to a politician of virtue, a politician of biblical beliefs, a politician who's rooted in the biblical idea of service to the American people, which is done with humility. Those are the type of changes we should be looking first and foremost to make, and then start looking at parties and level of conservatism and so forth.
The financial impact of Hurricane Harvey, they're pegging it somewhere on $40 billion. The energy, highway infrastructure, the impact on oil production, 1/4 of the nation's oil refineries and oil transport comes out of Texas. That's being impacted. Offshore drilling is being impacted by this storm. The trickle-down effect, we've been looking at this bull market on Wall Street. You know, is this going to bring about some uncertainty in the investment community? I haven't seen a radical response by Wall Street. It seems to be still trending, minor losses, but 34 points is not a crash. That's just a daily adjustment. What do you think the long-term impact will be? And do you think that this actually will bring an economic stimulus? Because there's going to be a tremendous amount of construction. There's going to be a tremendous amount of spending going on in the rebuilding of Texas.
I do. If you look at the bare dollars and cents of it, if wars are good for the financial community, if wars are good for the finances of a country, then certainly a disaster that's happening in Texas with the rebuilding and all the resources that are going to need to be replaced and rebuilt there, that's certainly going to prove an economic stimulus. But I think the short-term result, we can expect to see things like maybe gas prices rise a bit, things like that. But I was actually a little heartened by some of the stories I've been reading the last couple of days about what's going on in Texas. And it's not like in Katrina, when New Orleans was, the media pictures there were just people victimized and crying out for the government to help. Here, coming out of Texas, you have citizens upon citizens being shown in the media, in the news, helping the rescuers. They're standing alongside the emergency responders. And helping save people from homes. They're taking it on themselves to take their private boats into the street and go rescue 10, 20, 30 of their neighbors. This is a real joyful moment, I guess, when you look at it from that respect. And it just shows that even in the midst of the darkest of times, America's spirit, the spirit of Judeo-Christian beliefs, the spirit of charity, helping others, can still rise high.
Well, you're exactly right. I've seen this, and you see exiting out of New Orleans, the Cajun Navy, pickup trucks with boats are heading towards the storm-impacted areas to go launch their boats to help out people who are stranded. And people are poking holes in their roof. They're climbing as high as they can. They're sitting on the roof waiting to be rescued. And these rooftop rescues, which is almost beyond comprehension. The second story of a house is about 20 feet in the air. The roof line, which you're above that point, is 25 or 28 feet above the ground, and people are being rescued by boat off of their roofs. It's hard to imagine that kind of flooding. It's hard to imagine a city that was built that way, where the highway system is basically built like a canal. These are the lowest levels, and they're actually basically designed that way with knowledge that they're in a floodplain and that they're going to flood in heavy storms. But this is beyond anything that I've ever seen, that the potential for 50 inches of rain in an already saturated, so this is 50 inches of rain above the ground. This is not anything going into the ground. And they said for it to drain into the Gulf, back into the rivers and the tributaries going into the Gulf of Mexico, we're looking at weeks, months, and the potential for years. They're having to let water out of dams. These things are overflowing at flood level. And imagine the impact of a dam flooding. Well, that top water begins to impact the dam's integrity. So if the dam bursts, you're talking about a release of water compounding an already impossible situation. But the stunning thing about Harvey is the minimal loss of life. This is extraordinary that we have, you can count on one hand, the number of lives lost in a catastrophic storm impacting 5 to 7 million people. It's quite a testimony to the advance warnings, to the meteorologists and the people who actually heeded the warning to go out, to evacuate. The question becomes, is this mayor of Houston that told his people not to evacuate and is still defending that position while Houston is devastated?
Yeah, in the days to come, we're going to have plenty of opportunity to look over the politics of how this all played out. But the devastation that these people out in Texas are suffering right now is just, it's heartbreaking, because once the floodwaters finally clear and dry, and as you rightly point out, that could take weeks, what a mess. The mud, the homes just washed away. A lot of people are just going to have nothing left. And once again, this is where America shines. When there's a tragedy in any state in America, people forget politics and they just donate. They take vacation days and they rush to the scene just to help. It's what makes America great. And on one hand, it's sadness and just utter devastation, and on the other, it's so inspirational and motivational how people can react to this.
Well, you see the real heart of what we would call the Christian backbone of America, the salt of the earth that are not bringing a lot of attention to themselves. They're faithful churchgoers on Sunday, and they become the hands and feet. And Christianity getting such a bad rap today in the world as being offensive. Yes, Jesus was offensive. He was offensive to the leadership. He was offensive to the status quo. He wanted people to stand up to be counted for what their faith was and to take a stand for their faith, be defenders of their faith, and be those that would take care of the widows and the orphans and those that had a need. And so we're seeing the mobilization of those that have a heart for ministry and those that have a heart for their fellow man, which is what made America great to begin with. What the founding fathers saw was Judeo-Christian values, and now we're seeing that played out in the world today. So we're going to leave this segment of the Cheryl Chumley Hour on a high note, giving credit to those that are foregoing their own comfort to go into a flood zone where there has been all kinds of physical devastation, but life has been preserved to the greater extent. The power of God to remind us in these times to count our blessings and to be a blessing to others. Cheryl Chumley, you are a blessing to us here at Igniting a Nation and our program Revealing the Truth. Thank you so much for hosting the Cheryl Chumley Hour. We'll see you right back here on the 25th of next month as we host again the Cheryl Chumley Hour on the last Monday of every month at the 11 o'clock Central Time hour. So thank you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.